great. Don't let a buzz ruin it. Buzz driving is drunk driving.
There we go. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of Community Development and Environment Committee, starring
Councilmember Morell.
I'm still here.
as Councilmember Morell,
Councilmember Krueger.
Here.
as Councilmember Krueger,
Councilmember Ayala.
Here.
as Councilmember Ayala,
Councilmember Yambe.
starring himself, Councilmember Yave.
And Councilmember Denson.
I am here as well.
You have
Very
5
excited to be
members
here.
present.
All right. We have a riveting script in front of us. Are there any suggestions to change the script? If not, the agenda is approved. And I will also call for any changes to the last episode, episode 2. Are there any changes to the minutes? Seeing none, the minutes are approved. Well, thank you all for being here. We have an exciting show for you today, full of drama and intrigue and exciting updates and cliffhangers. We are going to count on our amazing guest cameo stars for providing this great information for us. So without further ado, I will go to our staff person, Mr. Krueger, to introduce the first item, which is the Key Peninsula Metropolitan Park District Briefing. Mr. Krueger.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, committee members. As the chair indicated, we do have a full agenda today to talk about various aspects of park and recreation being provided throughout our county. First up will be Tracy Prokosky, who is the Executive Director of the Key Peninsula Metropolitan Park District, who does have a PowerPoint presentation she will walk the committee through, describing what they are up to out on the Key Peninsula, as well as potential opportunities for future partnerships with the county as we move forward in 2025. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Krueger. Mr. Prokosky, thank you for appearing on episode 3 of CDEC. Take it away.
I do apologize to all of you. I am recovering from a little bit of a cold, so if I step away for some water, just please accept my apologies. So next slide, please. So I wanted to start off first by just giving you a few facts and some information about the Key Peninsula Metropolitan Park District. We're known colloquially as Key Pen Parks. We were created by our voters on May 28th, 2004, so last year was our 20th anniversary. We have about 21,000 people who live on the KP, and the district is governed by a 5-member board of park commissioners. We are incredibly lean. So there are 12 3/4 full-time equivalent employees, a total of 15 people. 3 1/4 of those serve in my division, which is administration, and 9 1/2 of those serve in parks operations. And so if you've ever wondered why Chair Denson asks me for information and it takes me a little while to get to you, now you know why. All of us wear a lot of hats. We are what our board likes to call us as a parks and facilities provider for our community. In other words, we don't provide sort of like classic recreation programs, right? Like summer camps or those kinds of things. We hold about 10 community events annually. Next slide, please. So how do we recreate on the KP, which, by the way, if you've never been, is a really fantastic place to come. We have 10 parks. 4 of those are on land that we lease from other entities. In total, my district manages just under 1,500 acres. We have 30 miles of trails, and when I say all user, that means people, horses, dogs, bikes. The horse part is the part there that's a little unique, especially for a small parks district. We also have some dedicated mountain biking trails. We also have a spray pad. We have 3 playgrounds. We have 3 waterfront parks. The district manages just over 4,100 feet of water frontage on the Sound. We have 3 grass athletic fields, 3 picnic shelters, and 2 dog parks. And I've hit just the highlights for you. We also have a few other things there. Next slide. I wanted, though, to really focus in on my time with you today, talking about some of our major projects for 2025. And so we have 3 that are planning related: the creation of a capital facilities plan, an update to our comprehensive plan, which some agencies like Pierce County call your PROS plan, as well as an update to our Gateway Park master plan. We're looking at 2 property acquisitions, which I'll talk about in a little bit. And then I've just listed for you some of our capital projects. So we're replacing one of our playgrounds. We're doing some waterfront repairs, some trail construction and wayfinding signage. We also, by the way, have 2 caretakers on some of our properties, and so we need to do some repairs to their homes, and then installing a new office for our maintenance team, who currently works out of an unheated and uncooled barn. Yes, yes, including with the horse stalls. Next slide, please. We're working hard on planning for our future, right? It's 2025, but our Board of Parks Commissioners and myself are really focused on the next 10 years and what can we do within our district. And so a key component of that is the creation of our first standalone capital facilities plan. This has been an 18-month project. It will conclude, I'm very excited to say, this June. And really what we're focused on is how do we tackle some of our long-term deferred maintenance projects? How do we complete some of our waterfront repairs? How do we build out our existing parks? How do we take a long look at our district facilities? Our headquarters office is 632 square feet, and I just talked about the conditions that our maintenance team works in. We're also going to be focusing on an update to our Gateway Park Master Plan. Gateway Park is really our flagship park at the district. Currently, it's adjacent to 360 Trails. Our last master plan update was completed a decade ago, and so at the tail end of this year, we're going to be engaging the community to see how their needs have changed, what new things they might like to see in our community so that we can begin to budget and plan for those. And then, as I said earlier, I'll be doing our comprehensive plan update. It's a 6-year update required by RCO. Next slide, please. The planning, though, will not end, though, in 2025, right? That's a key component of parks and paying attention to our community and listening really closely to them. And so as we think about budgeting for 2026, we're already looking at some of our other parks that don't have these master plans. And so that's our brand new Lavender Park Farm, as well as Key Central Forest. Taylor Bay Park does not yet have a master plan, which is on the south end of the peninsula. And then our last update to Volunteer Park, which is our second really most busiest park, was last done 12 years ago. Next slide. Everybody, though, loves playgrounds, and a playground replacement is actually on our agenda over the next 2 months. And so Home Park, which is a small, just under 2-acre pocket park in the community of Home, is getting a full replacement of its playground. It will be a volunteer build or a community build, and I would like to say that you don't have to live on the KP in order to help come build our playground. And so if you're interested in that, just reach out to me and I'll be happy to share with you the information on how to do that. Anyone can help. You don't have to be able to lift big pieces of playground equipment. Next slide, please. There are also 2 land acquisitions that we're looking at, and one of these is really key for us because it fills a need that's outlined in our comprehensive plan. I mentioned earlier that we do allow horses and equestrians in some of our parks and some of our trails. The Key Peninsula has a lot of equestrian properties within our district. And one of the things that community has requested of us for years is some sort of facility for them, a dedicated space for them. And so these 51 acres, which is adjacent to both 360 Trails and Gateway Park, we are looking at purchasing. It currently has a number of barns, stables, a lunging arena, and lots of just great open space to be able to host small events for equestrians, for our youth and 4-H. And so we're incredibly excited about it. And I would be remiss not to thank the county for your help and support on this. We are working in partnership with the Great Peninsula Conservancy, GPC, to acquire this property. And through that is $1.5 million in Pierce County Conservation Futures Funds, $250,000 in REIT, and $600,000 in park impact fees. And then Key Pen Parks will be contributing just under $600,000. We're due to close at the end of this calendar year. It is very, very exciting for us. Next slide, please. Located actually adjacent to the Zarin property, which also means that it's adjacent to Gateway Park as well as 360 Trails, is another piece of land. It's 38 acres. We are looking at this as conservation land. It has timber and wetlands on it along with a salmon-bearing creek. Our future plans here are some trails for public access. There is an application into the Conservation Futures Program for this land, and we're due to close on this actually within the next few months. What's really exciting here is that by the time you look at the land that the district already owns as part of Gateway Park, 360 Trails, which is land owned by DNR. However, the district has a 50-year lease on it for long-term recreation. Plus these two acquisitions, we will actually have just over 500 acres of contiguous parkland right at the north end of the Key Peninsula. It's just a wonderful thing to think about in terms of active recreation, passive recreation, inclusion of all user groups, as well as land conservation. Next slide, please. However, as we all know, with owning parks, whether those are new or existing parks, that always means you have repairs. So another project on our list for this year is in our Maple Hollow Park, some waterfront repairs. This picture that you're looking at is actually of some maple tree roots that used to be a bluff that you could walk on and then walk down the little gabion stairs. As you can tell, those need massive repairs. That is from the King Tides. And so later this year, we'll be putting out an RFP for some design ideas as to how to solve this problem and be able to keep access to Maple Hollow. What's really unique and special about Maple Hollow is it's actually a white sandy beach versus rocky. And those are incredibly hard to find around here. Next slide. We're also going to be doing some ADA improvements to Volunteer Park. This is our 632 square foot administration building, which will hopefully be replaced sometime in the next 20 years. But the ramp in front of there is non-compliant, and so that's due for replacement, as well as some signage to help people make their way around the park, as well as adding some ADA compliant pathways for our fields. The last project that I would like to highlight for you is, next slide please, is we're going to be doing some small trail construction as well as some wayfinding signage. So the map that you see there on the right is just over 25 miles of trails which exist in the 360 Trails complex. I'm very pleased to say that we have finally named all of those trails, and so by the time this year is done, we'll have full wayfinding signage as well as emergency markers out there, which is something our community has been asking for years. We're also going to be building 2 new small trails in Gateway Park. And lastly, I've talked a lot about our properties, but we also host a number of community events every year. And so they really range. These are mostly free to the community. There are 2 of them which do have a small fee. New this year is our Music in the Park series, and returning favorites are our Summer Solstice Gnomes, our Cinema Under the Stars, which is essentially movies in the park, as well as our Family Fun Fest. Last slide, please. If you would like more information, or if you might like to come visit one of our parks or attend one of our events, here's how you can reach out and keep in touch with us. And Chair, if it's appropriate, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Absolutely. Excellent performance. Do any of my colleagues have questions? Councilmember Krueger, and I'm betting it's about the horses, right?
No,
Oh.
although I'm really excited for that. That's one of the priorities I think that conservation dollars should be used for. Parks and horses. I just wanted to check, you said was it like 500 contiguous?
Yes.
And how many people come and use that? Is that been guesstimated or?
So that is a great question and something that I'm working on, which is we don't have a counter actually at our park. And that is one of the things that I plan on installing this year, so we can try and figure out how many people actually come and use the park. Anecdotally, we are packed in the summer and have to open overflow parking in grassy areas because we only have 92 parking spaces. Yes.
That seems kind of silly, but I get it.
I'm confident that one of the outcomes of the Gateway Park Master Plan update will be more parking.
Okay. Well, or park over there and ride the horse.
I like that too.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Good question. Thank you. Any other questions? Well, my assistant Nicole and I had the opportunity the other day to paint some gnomes that will be hidden throughout the parks, and then at the summer solstice, people can go out and find the gnomes. So that's a really, really fun project, and they have had so many community members that have come out on multiple opportunities to paint these gnomes, kids and adults. It's really, really fun. So thank you for all your awesome work.
Thank you.
Good job.
Appreciate your time today.
Oh, hold on just a moment.
Yes.
Councilmember Ayala has a question.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to make a connection. I actually had a recent conversation with Tacoma Arts Live, who does programming across Pierce County, and they did express interest in a Key Pen partnership. So I would love to make a connection if possible.
I would love to make that connection, and I'll come talk to you when this meeting is done.
Wonderful, thank you.
Awesome. All right, thank you so much. All right, next up, we have a briefing on our Parks and Recreation Pros Plan by Tiffany Odell. Mr. Kruger, do you have an introduction for us?
No, I mean, other than the fact that we have a pros plan that we know is in the works, I believe the department is trying to complete a first draft of that document by end of second quarter this year, and the council will be looking for adoption early in 2026 for a new 6-year park and recreation plan for the county.
Okay, so this is a multi-season project, and Ms. Odell can wow us. No expectations.
Thank
No
you, Chair
pressure.
Jensen. I'm Tiffany Odell. I am the planning supervisor for Pierce County Parks. Next slide. As Mr. Kruger mentioned, we are updating our Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan. I have been here, I think, September, February, and today I have another presentation in May to give you updates. I'm going to go through a little bit of review, but feel free to go back to those if you want to take a deep dive, or always reach out to me. So our Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Plan is our long-range plan for the department. We're required to update it every 6 years to remain eligible for state grant funding. And one of the changes this year is we're looking to expand our capital improvement plan chapter to a 20-year outlook. Next slide. So this is a quick look of where we are today. In 2023, we reassembled the Park Impact Fee Working Group, who make recommendations on our fiscal policy and priority capacity projects. We did a lot of public engagement, inventory, and demand and needs assessment in the second half of last year and into this year. My last presentation in February took a deep dive into survey and demand and needs assessment. And right now, we are starting to develop the draft plan, which is really sort of where the rubber meets the road. We take all of the information that we've assembled to date, and we start to use that to document decisions going forward. Next slide. So again, quick review. Our park system is massive and very diverse. It stretches from the shores of Puget Sound to the edge of Mount Rainier National Park. We have community centers, sports complexes, both urban and rural parks, equestrian facilities, boat launches, you name it, we might have it. And we serve all of Pierce County's nearly 1 million people with regional services, as well as being the primary service provider for nearly 400,000 unincorporated residents. Next slide. So our department's role as we look at this is a little different than park districts or cities when they provide parks. We're a regional provider, so we provide facilities and services across Pierce County, whether you live in a city or in an unincorporated area. We also, by the comprehensive plan policy, are called to be a regional coordinator. So again, we look outside of our service area and look to coordinate with others like Tracy to understand what the needs are across the county for parks and work together to realize those goals. Trails and sports complexes are great examples of those. People often cross jurisdictional boundaries for those services, so that's where we really try to work together and make sure that we're serving the county as a whole. And we're also a local provider. As I mentioned, there are about 400,000 residents in unincorporated Pierce County that don't have a city or a park service or a park district provider who we are the primary service provider for, and those include both urban and rural communities. Next slide. So this is the meat of today's presentation, is all about building our capital improvement plan. I already mentioned that we are looking to expand this out to a 20-year outlook. In the previous PROS plan, we had a 10-year capital plan, and based on some of the things I'll mention a little later where we've gone a little out of line with our PROS plan, we really want to be able to better anticipate what's coming in our system. We want to make sure we have a plan that is fiscally conservative and fiscally constrained so that we know it's actually an achievable plan. And yeah, I think that's all I want to say on that. And sorry, this graphic here is, these are sort of the guiding pieces that we look at. So we look at policies from the comprehensive plan that tell us what our priorities are for investment and where we should be investing. We have the fiscal policy that was adopted in 2016 that gives us more direction on how we spend our money and has a priority project list, and our demand and needs assessment, which is probably the other very important chapter of the PROS plan that really looks at how we serve our community and why, and drives so much of the decision making in terms of where we make investments and how we do our programming. Next slide. So I want to review our capital funding sources. The graphic on the right reflects the capital funding source outlay from the 2020 to 2030 PROS plan. So this gives you an idea of sort of the split of monies that we use to invest in major improvements in the park system. Each of these sources has their own rules. So it's a little bit like a jigsaw puzzle to put together a capital plan where you have a system so diverse that has aging infrastructure as well as a ton of growth where we need to build capacity in our park system. So you can see park impact fees. At this time, our projection was park impact fees would make up nearly 40% of our capital revenue. Those impact fees are collected with every new dwelling unit in unincorporated Pierce County, and they have to be used to add capacity to the park system. So we can't replace an existing piece of infrastructure with park impact fees. We have to be building to serve the growth that's happening in Pierce County. That drives some of the decision making in our park system. As you can imagine, if most of our funding comes from something that requires capacity, you'll see us build our park system up. The remaining funding sources can be used for other things like preservation. So again, it's really a puzzle and sort of a push-pull for us to figure out how to invest these things in the right projects to take care of our existing system while building it. Park sales tax is a much more flexible funding source. It can be used for financing, acquisition, maintenance and operations, and staffing. So not all of the park sales tax that we collect goes to capital. It goes to maintenance and operations and other things in our park system. Second, real estate excise tax makes up about 30% of this picture, and it must be used for capital projects. So we can't use it for staffing, but it can be used for things like preservation projects where we're taking care of the existing infrastructure. Unlike impact fees, it doesn't have to just go toward capacity. And then also, we had anticipated about 17% of our funding coming from grants and other sources. And of course, every source there has its own set of rules in terms of what it can be applied to. And that's really where we're leveraging our funding. We're looking at our funding and saying, this is a great opportunity to pull in a little more money so we can spend money over here. Next slide. So I'm going to go through, if you remember sort of the Venn diagram, the three pieces, I'm going to go through those here and just give you sort of what we see our drivers being at a high level from each of those. With the comprehensive plan, which was very recently adopted, as you know, the second two sets of policies, these aren't verbatim policies, this is a summary, but essentially those were existing in the comprehensive plan. Those haven't really changed. Our priorities for capital investments are to preserve the quality and capacity of our existing system and then invest in capacity within the existing system or at properties we already own, and then to expand the park system. We also prioritize those facilities based on the demand and need assessment. And again, we update that every 6 years with our PROS plan update. What is new with this comprehensive plan is the first one on the slide, their PR3, where we're promoting neighborhood access to the park system in urban areas. And that's really looking at trying to get everyone living in an urban area within about a half a mile of a park or trail or open space. We have gaps there. That has not been our mandate in the past. We've been a regional and county service provider. So one of the focuses of our demand and need assessment this time around is to look at our gap analysis and just understand what it would take and where there are opportunities to expand to provide that level of service. Next slide. Next up is our fiscal policy. This was adopted by council resolution starting back in 2016 with the major increase to the park impact fee. It was adopted based on the park impact fee working group recommendations at that time. There were updates to the fiscal policy adopted in 2021. And we, as I mentioned, we also reassembled the Park Impact Fee Working Group in 2023. Those recommendations have not yet been considered by council. The fiscal policy includes guidance on how we spend our revenues. It includes guidance on planning and system management. Much of that policy was integrated into the comprehensive plan update recently. And the fiscal policy also includes this split on how we should invest park impact fee revenue. So not only in capacity projects as is required by state law, but also spending 32% of impact fees on existing parks and trails, 38% on new trails, and 30% on new parks. So that's another piece of sort of this jigsaw puzzle that we're putting together, trying to calibrate it to this. Next slide. The 2016 fiscal policy also included a priority project list. So these were identified as priority capacity projects that we should work on over a 10-year time period. So the impact fee was stepped in, so full collection wasn't until 2018. So 10 years from 2018, this would be a 2028 list. This list was incorporated into the 2020 to 2030 PROS plan. So all of these projects are also in the existing PROS plan. And what this is showing is projects that are complete or underway have green checks. There's one project that's got some legal complications I won't get into today. Happy to answer questions about it at your request later. But only a few projects you can see here haven't been started in some meaningful way. So we're making great progress. There's still obviously work to do on many of these projects. Next slide. Next up is our demand and needs assessment. So again, this was the third circle on our little Venn diagram. And this I went into much greater detail at our February presentation. I'm just going to skim what it is and the high level findings for you today. So our demand and needs assessment, again, we're really looking to understand our communities that we serve and what it is that they need based on their feedback and also data about them. This includes our gap analysis. It includes public survey and focus groups that we've done recently. It includes recreation trends, all sorts of information about population and demographics and housing density and all of that to help us understand where we need to make investments. Next slide. And these are the key findings coming out of that. So Pierce County currently serves more people per park acre, per trail mile. That just means that we have fewer parks for much more people than many other parks providers. South Hill and Parkland Spanaway Midland communities have received the highest rates of growth and have the highest population density. They're also projected to continue to receive the highest rates of growth. So we know we need to focus facilities in those urban areas. There's a regional demand for sports complexes and gyms. We know that, again, Pierce County serves more people per facility than most other service providers, and that's actually as a county, not just our park system. And then in our recent survey, we saw that there's a much higher demand coming out for indoor facilities than we've seen in the past. So things like community centers is starting to rank a little higher as something the community wants to see. Next slide. So here, the next 4 slides, I'm going to do a quick look at the project list from the 2020 to 2030 PROS plan. So that, again, is a 10-year duration plan. We're halfway through it. And I'm going to go region by region. And I apologize, I didn't put a regions map in this slide. So in general, Central Region is the area just east of I-5, the Parkland Spanaway Midland community, the Summit Waller, sort of the mid-county communities area, Summit Waller and North Clover Creek Collins, and then everything heading south down toward the Nisqually River toward Roy. So this is our project list. We have 13 of the 16 projects on this list either complete or underway. And these lists are also the starting point for the next PROS plan. So the fiscal policy list that I showed you, as well as these project lists, because we're only halfway through that PROS plan, this is kind of our jumping off point. Next slide. For the North region, we have 7 of the 12 projects underway, so just a few projects that we haven't picked up here in some meaningful way. Next slide. The South region, 6 out of 11 projects underway. You can see we've only totally completed 1 project in the South region, being Cross Park. We have several other projects that are well underway and moving toward completion. Next slide. And in the West region, we have 5 of the 8 projects underway. And again, you can see I'm using the little question mark where we've got something funny going on with this facility. So here, like the Lakewood Community Center, during the last budget session, the council said that we ought to demolish the Lakewood Community Center in a few years. So we've sort of put any investments in that facility other than keeping it online as it is today on hold. So that's why you're seeing question marks like that, where we've got some sort of issue with a project. So that, again, is the update on where we're at with the 2020 to 2030 PROS plan, and that's where we'll start our work with the 2026 to 2046 PROS plan. Next slide. This is a plan. Plans don't always go as we expect them to. The 2020 PROS plan was our first fiscally constrained PROS plan. It was our first PROS plan after adoption of the park impact fee. So we had significantly more revenue to work with than we had with any other PROS plan. So we did a financial projection. We used the fiscal policy project list and looked at our park system and assessed where we should be making investments. And we didn't catch everything. So these are some of the projects. These aren't even all of the projects that have come up that weren't on the PROS plan, along with the same check marks for yellow and green. If you look through this list, you will notice that many of those projects are preservation projects. That's part of the reason that we're pushing out to a 20-year plan, because we know that we need to look at our system and anticipate what's coming. Things like the Foothills Trail bridges. We've got several bridge issues along Foothills Trail. We had an emergency one come up this past year that took our staff sideways with spiked and ditch bridge and a trail closure. So really making sure we're incorporating those needs into our PROS plan so we can anticipate them so that they don't become emergency projects that pull all of us sideways, so that we're really able to be more efficient with our capital programming. Next slide. And this is similar, other considerations. These are the things that we can put together what we think is a perfect plan, but the world doesn't always work that way. So things like staff capacity, we have to make sure that we have enough staff to spend the revenues down with these capital projects. We have lots of grant, so with 20%, close to 20% of our capital going towards grants, it takes tons of time to build those partnerships, to write grant applications and manage grants. Just changes in the economy, again, emergencies, procurement delays, all sorts of things kind of change that trajectory for us. So we're really looking to solutions for this next PROS plan to build those into our department, into our systems, to make sure that we can avoid as many of these sorts of problems as we can. Next slide. So this slide is just a quick look at something we're tracking over time. And we're looking at our actual budget, our budget versus our actuals compared to staffing. So you can see as staff goes up, our efficiency goes up. So we're able to handle more projects and deliver more. And this is something that we'll just track over time. The economy is always changing, and we'll keep an eye on this and continue to report this out for you. Next slide. So just as a wrap up, again, our next step is to go forward and build this 20-year capital improvement program. And these are the pieces that we see as the major drivers of the decision making in terms of what goes into that plan. So we need to continue our role as a regional provider and coordinator. We also need to be a local service provider for those 400,000 residents. as well as look at how we can start to provide park services within walking distance of urban residents. That's a heavy lift. That's not going to happen overnight, so we need to be creative and think about how we can get that sort of access for people. We need to provide more access to green space and natural areas, especially in urban communities. As we urbanize, we lose opportunities to pick up green spaces, and it's easier to preserve a green space and enhance it than it is to take something and try to create something. We need to keep pace with growth and community needs, so continuing to track that demand and needs assessment, understand who it is that we're serving, and provide services where they are. And we need to make efficient use of our funding and resources. Next slide. So back to our next steps here. Here today to give you just an overview of how we go about this capital improvement planning. At our next presentation at the beginning of May, I think it's May 5th, whatever the first Monday in May is, I will be back, and my goal is to bring you an overview of the projects that we're seeing for the next 20 years, and maybe some alternatives to give you some flavor and get your feedback about where you think we need to go. And that will be incorporated into the draft plan that we expect to release to the public in late spring or early summer. We will go through a public comment period this summer, and then we will bring this back to you. I think we go to Planning Commission in September. You may not see this again until after budget. Just in terms of timing, we may be back in January. We do need to adopt the plan by March of 2026 in order to remain eligible for the 2026 state grant round. Next slide. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for your attention. Happy to answer your questions.
Well, thank you for coming and for visiting with us so often this year to keep us up to date and allow us opportunity to contribute ideas and questions. Councilmember Morrell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation, Ms. Odell. It's always nice to have you in chamber. I appreciate, forward thinking on that pertaining to the 20-year outlook. My concern is the 10-year outlook hasn't really developed a lot of project delivery that I would say. It seemed to be bogged down quite a bit in process. I'm just curious to see if you're going to improve internally how you deliver these projects on time and on budget. I go through the CFPs here. I've been on this council longer than anyone here, and I really get frustrated with the inability. Of course, I represent the North District, but I remind people does not have one ball field, one soccer field, but yet some of these other areas have got multiple. So I am concerned about that. I would like to have an update at some point in time on the capital projects. I think you said you might be back in May.
Well, good news. Kimberly is here this afternoon to give a capital projects update. So
okay.
I'm doing the capital improvement plan, which is the 20-year, sort of the long-term outlook. Kimberly is going to report on what's in the budget for the current biennium, what we're working on right now, and what we're delivering. So I think she's going to be the best person to answer that question.
I will deliver to Kimberly that message. But there again, my concern is looking at this from an equitable standpoint. I know that your park impact fees are mobile. They don't have to stay in a region like traffic impact fees go. We've seen, the peninsula or, the park district get an allocation of impact fees, but there again, a lot of the development that's happening is up on the plateau. And I just don't see too much project delivery for that area. Sure, we have a trail. Appreciate that. But that trail's been in existence for 20 years now, if not longer. So when you come back and we take a look at this, I will, quiz you on, what's going to happen in the north. So anyway,
Absolutely.
thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Morrell, and I'm sure if you've got some suggestions or desires, you would want Councilmember Morrell to communicate those to you, right, Mr. Adele?
Absolutely, and happy to meet with council members individually to talk about what's happening in your district and get into more of the specifics on
I think
pros
that,
as well.
that would be helpful to make sure that they're hearing what your constituents are telling you. Okay, next we've got Councilmember Ayala.
Thank you, Chair. I will say I am very interested in having a one-on-one about District 4. But that aside, I'm curious how the PROS plan works in partnership, or I should say, in the creation of the PROS plan, how is their engagement for organizations such as the Chambers Creek Foundation or any other kind of funding branch or advocacy branch of parks and recreation spaces?
That's a great question. So when we do community survey, we try to reach out to those groups that are sort of the known community stakeholders. It could be something like the Chambers Creek Foundation, where they have specific interests, or like the Fair Board at Frontier, as well as community groups like Rotary, Kiwanis, those sorts of groups, to make sure that they're aware of the opportunity for public comment. I also make myself available to go out and provide presentations to those groups. I presented to Kiwanis last week or the week before. So absolutely, we welcome their feedback. In terms of the Chambers Foundation in particular, their interests are usually hyper-focused on just the Chambers Creek properties, and we engage them in a much more robust way when we do master plan updates. So we have a master plan for Chambers coming up, and we do an update there every 10 years. So I think it's due in 2027 or 28. So you'll see that in our capital facilities plan in the next biennium, and that will be where we really get into detail with the foundation.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Great question. Councilmember Krueger is next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question on the trails, are there safety issues out there? I'm just wondering, because the more trails that we build, the more people that can be out there, and then not necessarily at night, but there are people maybe there at night. I didn't know if we have had any issues with trail safety that we need to be paying attention to.
That's a great question. So right now, as you know, our major trail is the Foothills Trail. That's a question probably for our operational team to answer in terms of what are the specific issues they're running into. We're getting ready to complete construction on Pipeline, which has a close connection to the urban area. We'll be picking up construction on Parkland in the coming year, the Parkland Community Trail. And that is something that we'll have to look at in terms of our operations, and whether, especially in urban areas, if we experience more issues on the trail. It's not something that I think we experience at a really high rate on Foothills at this time. But again, I would defer to our operations team to give you a lot more detail on that, because they're there on the day-to-day.
Okay, and I wasn't seeing much with Ashford. Are there plans for capital improvements out there?
Not in the current capital facilities plan. We have an unfunded project for some parking and lighting improvements, so we're tracking that there's a need, but we have not had the funding to direct to that project in terms of priorities at this time. As we look at this capital improvement plan, we look at our whole park system inventory, and we compare it to, again, policy and demand and needs assessment, and as well as existing infrastructure. What do we need to preserve that we already own? So you may see Ashford in the future capital improvement plan.
Because mainly the reason I ask is when the demand travel system has been put in, a lot of people are, if they go to the mountain, they don't have a reservation, then what? And I believe there's been more use there in Ashford. And so when you mention demand and use, or the demand, I can't help but believe it's picked up there.
That's great. We will take a look at that. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. And could you reiterate, please, on the concept of having a service within a half mile of?
Yes.
Run that through again. What
So
the expectation
it's
is?
new comprehensive plan policy, and it comes from the Puget Sound Regional Council direction that urban residents should be within walking distance of a park system feature. So that could be a trail, a park, green space, something like that where people can connect with nature or have some sort of recreational activity. That was incorporated into our pros plan. And I don't have the exact language in front of me. We pushed back a little bit and just said, our directive has been county and regional parks for years. We didn't have an impact fee to build capacity in our park system until very recently. We're just starting to see returns on those projects because of how long it takes to move a project through the process. So now to switch gears and have to focus on within a half mile is going to be a challenge for us. And when we look at that half-mile service area and look at the neighborhoods we're serving and whether or not people can even walk to those parks because of the available infrastructure, we're seeing some disconnect there. So the policy exists. I believe, I can send you the exact language, but the policy, I believe, is something to the effect of promote walkability. So it gives us not a hard and fast, we must provide these neighborhood parks, but it's a goal that we're working toward.
And when you mentioned PSRP, did they suggest a funding source? Were they?
Not that I know of.
Okay. Thank you. And then I'm thinking I had seen in another presentation, there were picnic shelters for Frontier Park. Mm-hmm. Did I read that right? I didn't recall seeing picnics. And there's the goat barn.
It may be the Goat Barns project. Kimberly can give you an update on that project.
Okay.
I think it includes a use that is similar to picnic shelters.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And it looks like our staff member, Mr. Kruger, has something to add probably about the comp plan.
Thank you. And so I think Councilwoman Kruger asked a very, very good question. And the presentation was that you provided, Tiffany, was raising some questions in my mind related to the county's role as a local park provider. I noticed in the presentation there's a few slides that kind of indicate that maybe the county is moving away from being this regional provider and coordinator towards providing parks for kind of neighborhood parks.
No, we're saying it's one of our roles. So sort of three roles: regional service provider, regional coordinator, and local provider.
Okay, so looking at the comp plan, I'm not seeing that. I'm not seeing language. I mean, the comp plan was just adopted months ago. I don't recall much conversation happening during the adoption process that would kind of transition from that regional provider that we've been in that role for years to this more local provider, which does have significant fiscal impacts, and it's quite a change in terms of what shows up in the CFP in terms of new park development. I don't remember that conversation occurring, and when I'm looking at the recently adopted language in the park and recreation element, there certainly is a reiteration of being a regional park provider. And so I think it's really important for the committee to at least understand that if we are changing direction and there is going to be an emphasis in providing neighborhood parks and being that local service provider, that will show up in the pros plan. And so if that's what the council wants to do, you need to have your eyes wide open that it's quite a difference in terms of what's been operating here as county policy for at least the last 20 years. And this is the time to have that conversation, I guess, is my point, because the department's fully engaged in preparing this pros plan. If it shows up and it says, hey, the county is really going to be starting to focus on providing neighborhood parks within a half a mile of each other, the subsequent CFP and budget will reflect those choices. And I'm just not sure, at least at this moment in the committee meeting, whether or not that's consistent with the larger comprehensive plan policy that was just adopted.
I think we'd like to see that policy, because I don't remember that conversation either. It may well be in there. It's a huge document, but I'd love to see the actual policy.
And whether it's there or not, it's more about the reality, in my view. What is it that the council wants to do?
Can't do everything, yeah.
Well, what does the council want to do in terms of this pros plan? That's why Tiffany's here. She's looking for input, and the department is kind of signaling to the council that you're going to see a change in terms of what's going to be promoted. And planned for.
Okay. All right, looks like we've got a couple other questions or comments. Councilmember Morrell?
Thank you. To follow up on the conversation, when you talk about urban density, is there a number that you're looking at that defines urban density?
So anything within the UGA, so that policy that we're talking about, I believe is PR3 in the comp plan. I don't have the exact language in front of me, but that's what my slide was showing. And I believe it says in urban areas. So it doesn't call out a specific density. It would be anything within the urban growth area by my read. As we're doing our gap analysis, what we're doing is we're looking at housing data and we're looking at zoning. So where do we have the highest concentration of housing today? And then based on zoning, where do we expect that to go in the future? So looking at like the centers and corridors plan, those are the areas where we would expect that highest density to exist. And so those areas, in my mind, serving those areas is going to be the highest priority in terms of this local level of park service. We might have a hard time acquiring property in those areas.
Right.
May cost us a lot more, so it may be in proximity to those areas, but that would be my take in terms of how we move this forward.
To follow up on that, Madam Chair, the other question that I had, does the Parks Department get credit for developed parks and trails?
What do you mean by credit? Do
In
we
other
give
words,
credit or get?
Well, I mean, we define in a lot of our master plans, you will have so many parks set aside, acreage set aside for parks, so many linear parks, trails, like Tahale. I mean, it's got probably 14 miles of trails, and it has its own set aside for parks. Does that get credited to your half-mile Vision 2050 focus?
So right now, as we're working on this gap analysis, what we've asked our consultants to do with the gap analysis for those master plan communities, those are the communities that are supposed to provide those services internally. So like Tahale, they're providing their own parks and trails. We're looking at those as the local or neighborhood parks. And in the gap analysis, we're basically blocking out those communities from this half-mile trajectory because we're assuming that those communities are meeting that within. So if you look at Tahale or Sunrise or Silver Creek or Gem Heights, those master plan communities, we wouldn't plan to provide neighborhood parks in those neighborhoods because the expectation is they already have neighborhood parks. They should absolutely still have access to our county parks, regional parks, and those should be spread throughout the county. But in terms of that urban neighborhood park calculation, that's how we're doing our gap analysis right now.
Okay, and since you didn't include a map in the presentation, is Sunrise, La Poma Firs, is that in the south?
Correct. Those are both in the south region. Anything in the South Hill community or Graham community are going to be in the south region. And I apologize for skipping that map in today's presentation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you for that. Councilmember Ayala?
Thank you, Chair. I'm curious, has the park system ever gone through an NRPA accreditation process?
I don't think so. Kimberly, that might be, I don't think we have.
Okay. And then, I mean, I am very curious to see about that policy. I do see that Puget Sound Regional Council has a recommendation for a 10-minute walk for urbanized communities as part of their health initiative for individuals. Also coming from Parks Tacoma, this was really big there, but I understand it's a different system, different approach to this work. I'm curious in terms of the direction or vision of PSRC and what that means to the park system itself, where do you see that guidance or that support, if any, or what would you like to see out of that, where maybe we could be a bit more supportive in that space?
That is a great question. I don't have an answer for you. Most of the grant funding that we see comes from the Washington Recreation and Conservation Office. That's why we do that's not the only reason we do a pros plan. Obviously, it's good to have a long-range plan, but that's why we do it every 6 years, is to retain eligibility for those grants. Generally, PSRC grants are not something that we're using in the Parks Department. Many of those are federal pass-through grants, and they have significantly more red tape to receive the funding and get through the process, so the projects would cost us more. So we generally try to focus on state projects unless there's a really great reason to go after federal funding.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Well, I haven't given the whole idea of these neighborhood parks any thought, frankly, before this discussion, but just a couple of things that I wanted to bring up, and thank you, Mr. Kruger, for raising it. I mean, obviously, I love the idea of our more urbanized areas having good access to parks. As we are promoting density in some of these communities, we need to make these places a good place to live for individuals, families, children, whether it's walkability and transit or parks. Absolutely. My concern is how realistic it is with the budget that we have. And we not only have these urban areas, but we have a whole lot of rural areas. So a couple of thoughts. One is, I know some of our park districts, and I think you all too, are working with the schools. So looking at where we can have partnerships with schools in the urban areas in particular, and where those can meet that threshold, and maybe we're supportive or partnering in some way, but we don't have to build a whole new park where a school is nearby. We've had some conversations, we just had a conversation last week about how some of these urban areas, not all of them, but some of these urban areas may incorporate at some point in the future, or may be annexed into the city at some point in the future. So I also hesitate, how much of our limited funding do we want to put into those areas when we think they might be incorporating and have funding sources of their own? So just a thought on that. In contrast, our rural areas are never going to incorporate, and they're never going to get annexed, and regional parks are really, I think, the best way to serve those rural communities that are always going to be rural. I mean, really the only way you can serve them is to have these larger regional parks where people are coming in to recreate. So those are not answers for you, I'm sorry, but just kind of some things to think about as we wrestle policy-wise with how much investment and where we're going to put that investment in these neighborhood parks. Maybe there's a few sporadic that we really need because it's an area, for example, that is urban or densifying, and it's not likely to get incorporated or annexed anytime soon. Like, those might be ones that we really want to focus on. I know some of the central and south areas, the areas where we're really densifying, I know that they do lack park facilities, and that's not fair, and that's not what we want for the residents of Pierce County. But I don't want to abandon the regional parks that are going to be there for a long, long time, serving everyone in the county, and certainly the folks in the rural areas. Does that make sense?
That is absolutely, you have described sort of the
challenge
puzzle that we're trying to put together here. There are limited resources, and trying to figure out the best way to invest those resources for the county as a whole and for these individual communities as they continue to grow. They've grown super fast over the last 30 years, and we haven't had the resources to invest. So
hard. If only there was more money. Mr. Kruger has the answer for us.
Well, no, I don't have the answer, but
Darn it.
I mean, I think you're pointing out, and as the committee's struggled with this last fall. This is really hard work. You're trying to incorporate this comprehensive plan, right, which is what you did, with policies related to annexation and incorporation, how to bring the cities to the table so that the annexations potentially can occur. What's in it for the city to pick up this territory, right? What motivates citizens to agree to vote themselves into a new taxing district or a city and be part of that community, or to incorporate and become its own entity, right? And I think you tried to lay the framework of that in your comprehensive plan, and you did promote in that plan concepts surrounding annexation, incorporation, how to deal with this very large urban growth area that we have. You shrunk it in places. You promoted transit in areas. You've described by policy where you think, park and recreation facilities should be. You've indicated that the comprehensive plan policies drive the pros plan, right? Mm-hmm. In terms of a hierarchy, that was a conversation that occurred. And I'm happy to hear the committee having this conversation today, because it's really important, I think, as you move forward throughout the rest of this year and setting forth your budget priorities for 2026 and 2027 to try to achieve those goals that have been articulated in the comp plan, to try to see that can work through implementation. And the next large piece of legislation that you're going to see to implement, besides the regulations that relate to zoning, will be this pros plan, right? And so staff will be looking for that consistency. And I think the more that you can talk to the department, the more. Tiffany's wanted to come up. She's asked, like, hey, can I come up more? How much? It's really good to do that and to let the department know what your policy objectives are.
We appreciate the check-ins, and you're always welcome. If you want to just come in and ask even a quick question, you don't even have to do the full presentation. We will make time for you, and of course, I'm sure all of us would make time for you individually too, if you just want to get feedback or test some ideas out.
Thank you for that.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, next up, my favorite program, Conservation Futures. This is about Conservation Futures property acquisitions. Mr. Kruger, did you have any preview for us?
Just very briefly. So the next three items that you'll be talking about in committee all are based upon council budget provisos. So when the council adopted your 2025 budget, you asked certain departments to come up and report back to the committee regarding work that they're doing related to the budget. And so Chris Chaput is here this afternoon to talk a little bit about the conservation futures that were identified for acquisition in the last cycle, and then I think kind of like looking forward, maybe talk about the new process that's just getting underway to identify conservation futures projects for the next biennium. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you for being with us.
Yes. Hello, all. I'm Chris Chapeau. I am your Conservation Futures Coordinator. Next slide. And before we get into the status update for our new council members and for the public at large watching this, I just wanted to provide a really brief overview of what is Conservation Futures in the program itself. So Conservation Futures is a grant program that provides funds for the preservation of open space. And open space for our program kind of falls into four large buckets. And that's fish and wildlife habitat, that's marine and freshwater shorelines, that's your working land, so agriculture and working forests, as well as parks and trails. So those kind of four big buckets can receive funding through this grant program. These funds are derived from the Conservation Futures tax levy. Everything is Conservation Futures named. So it all goes together. This fund is authorized under State Law 8434, and the portion of property tax that we collect for this currently is about 0.025 cents for every $1,000 of assessed value. This is below its maximum. The state allows us to collect a maximum of 0.0625 cents per $1,000 of assessed value. So we are not collecting at the state's maximum. We're collecting a bit underneath that. And projects that can come into the Conservation Futures programs are throughout Pierce County because the taxes are collected throughout Pierce County. All projects from nature conservancies to park districts to cities can apply for these funds. Next slide. So a brief overview of the 2023 projects. These were reviewed and approved in 23 for 24-25 funding. We had 7 projects overall. 3 of those projects closed in 2024. That was approximately 80 acres of conserved land in 24 for about $3.2 million.
That leaves 4 projects here in 2025. That's Island Boulevard on Fox Island, Nalyali, and then the Little Minter Creek project as well as Clover Creek. Now, Little Minter Creek is the same project that Tracy talked about. So those 2 projects are the same. They're just, we know them as different things. I did want to note that the Clover Creek project is at risk. This particular project is located in District 3 out off of Military Road, just south of the Tacoma Sportsman Club. The sponsor and the funding agency are working with the match funder through some issues. We are working as closely as we can and supporting them to the best of our ability, but they're working to make sure that their match funding doesn't fall through. So fingers crossed that all of these 4 projects close by the end of 2025. If they do, that's another 182 acres protected for about $7.5 million. So in total, that's 262 acres for about $10.7 million from the 23 projects. Next slide. So the funding for this year, as I mentioned, we have total purchases of about $7.5 million. We have a total available funds of about $8.6 million. So we have enough funds for the anticipated projects. Those fundings come from our beginning balance, which is the rollover from 24, plus the new funds that come in, and that's what the transfer from Fund 109 is, plus some unanticipated revenue. Yes. What is that? So WashDOT needed to take about 1.5 acres of property that was Conservation Futures property from the Foothills Trail at 162 to create a roundabout for their project up there. It didn't impact the Foothills Trail. It does take some property that was purchased with Conservation Futures dollars, which means their temporary construction easement plus the area for the roundabout. That money that we get for those pieces comes back to Conservation Futures, and we'll be able to use that for other projects.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, ma'am.
That just made me think. Property. Okay. Last year, and there was a property, it was part of like an industrial complex. There was a whole discussion about the tire facility.
Right.
We were selling it, and we
Yes.
were going to get the money into Conservation Futures.
Which we did.
Okay, that's different than this.
Correct.
That's other unanticipated
That's other
revenue?
anticipated funds that show in the 24 budget.
So,
This is just the 25.
okay, so we did get that money. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. We also have a opportunity account, and this is funds that are set aside in Fund 325 for what we consider construction projects or protection projects. These are, this is a fund for what we call off-cycle projects, and off-cycle means that they're exceptional opportunities, but they're a threat or in threat of development and cannot make the next cycle. So if there's something really great out there, they're going to either be developed or can't make the 2027 cycle. They can come and ask us for funds. We have about $1.3 million in this particular fund to provide to that particular or for that kind of project. There's a whole set of rules and regulations that they have to follow through to receive that funding, but there is a set aside amount of funding for those unexpected exceptional opportunities. Next slide. All right, so looking at this funding cycle, so Conservation Futures, like I said, is the grant program. We run the application cycle every other year in the odd years. So 2025 is an odd year, numerically, not just because it's an odd year. But we started our application cycle in November of 24. And that's to give our folks who would apply a little extra time to review all of the updated information from the program. In 24, With the assistance of a consultant and communications department, several improvements were made to the program, and this included updating our administrative guidelines, informational guidance like fact sheets. There's actually a 4-part video series on conservation futures, how to apply, who can apply, what it means to apply. There's new online application form, so we went electronic this year. There's model agreements so that the funding agreement and the stewardship agreements aren't black boxes. They can see and understand what the basic formula is for a stewardship agreement and what it means to be funded. There's also standardized time lanes for the projects now. And coming soon is an updated public map of the Conservation Futures projects. This will be an interactive map that people can go on and look up Conservation Futures projects. They can get a little bit of information about what those projects are, where they're spatially located within Pierce County, as well as a link out to the actual entity that holds those projects to get more information about how to access them and any stewardship.
Councilmember Krueger has a question.
Yes.
I was just going to wait till the end, but if I was just on the back page, I'm trying to discern the Opportunity Fund. Is that from the general fund?
No, it is not. It is, that is still Conservation Futures dollars. We just take $250 million every year and set that aside, and it collects until there's an application that comes in and asks for those funds.
You mean 250,000?
Yeah, $250,000.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And, okay, that's where I was thinking that the .0025 is split then between the two.
Correct.
Okay, I thought it wasn't. Glad to be corrected. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. All right, please proceed.
Yeah. So we did a whole bunch of updates to the program in 2024. The application period opened in November. The application period closed in February of this year. We got 7 applications with a total of roughly $8.7 million in fund requests. We're estimating about $5 million in available funds this year for the next biennium. Yeah, that's where we're at with this. So the project timeline that you see on the screen is how we move through Conservation Futures. Typically, the applications would open in January instead of November. March through April are our review periods. We have 2 reviews. One is a technical review by a technical advisory board. They will wrap up their review here at the end of March. The second review is with the Citizen Advisory Board. They take the technical information, the application, and a presentation by the sponsor of the applicants and score those projects. That score becomes a ranking that you will all see in June, along with the formal recommendation. I believe in August we will come back to you with that recommendation and final resolution. In 2026 in January, we'll be able to start funding those projects. Next slide. Yeah, that is my update. I saw some confused looks, so I'm here for any questions.
Oh, I didn't have a confused look. Maybe I did. That's possible. Thoughtful, perhaps. Could you just remind me? I think we've fixed it so that when you give us our ranking, there's going to be, for example, $5 million worth of projects that we would be asked to consider approving. But then there will be a couple of other projects that if they were good enough, if they scored highly enough, if more funding becomes available, if a couple of these other projects end up not closing, then you can automatically go down and pick those up. Is that correct?
That is correct. We will have an above the line and below the line funding.
Okay. Councilmember Morrell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is Conservation Futures purchase land inside the UGA and outside the UGA?
That is correct. It could be within incorporated or unincorporated, within urban or
rural areas.
Rural areas. Okay, and when you put a value on property, especially within the urban area, is it valued at its full potential for development, or how do you come up with a value on buildable land?
Yeah, so appraisers, we do appraisal and a review appraisal, and those appraisals are done at highest and best use. So if the underlying zoning for a piece of property is mixed use commercial, that's what we're going to be valuing that property at, and that's what we'll have to purchase that property at. If it's valued at residential medium density, that's the value the appraiser will appraise it at. So it is highest and best use.
Because, obviously we have conflicting issues here with housing versus conservation within the UGA. We're so far behind on building houses, but yet we're buying buildable land to set aside in those areas. So looking forward, I think that puts us in a very precarious position when we're trying to justify to folks why we can't meet our housing quotas. So I think that might be a conversation forward on that, especially within the UGAs. Rural areas, buy all the land you want. So as long as you can open them up to the public.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councilmember Krueger.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your comments, Committee Member Morrell. I agree with the conflict there, because even thinking of the concept of being walkable in 10 minutes, those park areas should be housing as well, unless the terrain is maybe for, when you run uphill, and you can really get a good workout with that. But my question is, most of the applications that come in, if I recall, are generally somebody sees a farm and they talk to the owner and say, hey, this would be a great place for conservation. Don't you want it to go in this perpetuity or something of that nature? But also, is it correct? I believe parks can make application for properties through the conservation futures. It seems that would be really the best use of these funds, keeping it within the realm of the taxpayers and access to these lands. Are there any programs being looked at currently in parks to use conservation futures? And,
Yes.
Oh, I'd love to hear if that's okay.
So Conservation Futures is opened up for any of the entities that meet certain requirements. You have to be a park, a district, or a city, or a non-profit conservation entity or a non-profit historic entity to apply for the funds. So Parks Department is very much one of those entities that can apply for those funds and has applied for those funds. We have parks in our system that were purchased through Conservation Futures. In this round, we actually have 2 projects that is in partnership, either a parks specific application or an application that's in partnership with parks. So Parks Department is utilizing Conservation Futures for.
And if there were a property that in someone's district that would be, how would someone go about nominating that? Like if I saw something, how can I encourage parks to look at that as, working for acquisition for a future?
That's when you get a hold of me and let me know what those
We're
are.
on. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Ayala.
Thank you, Chair. Just really quickly, in terms of the funding recommendations that are made, are they typically always at 100% of the ask, or are there any conditions in which that may be different? Generally, they have been at 100% of the ask from the applicant. We may, in the future, put some conditions on those purchases, or recommend that conditions go on those purchases, or depending on where the funding line falls, may suggest that partial funding be applied to those particular applicants.
Thank you.
But just so you know, there is a required match of at least 10%. And if there's higher than 10%, they get additional points. So it's encouraged to come with more funding, but it can be a challenge. These are expensive properties, and even the match is often a lot of money. So it's a challenge for these nonprofits or park districts.
Absolutely.
But that, in my experience. Any other questions? All right, thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you back in August, right? Excellent. All right, next up, we have our Parks Capital Improvement Project presentation by Ms. Kimberly Freeman. Mr. Kruger, any introduction for this?
Quickly, just note that this, again, is a request from the committee to have the Parks Department come and present regarding the capital program that they are implementing. Section 4 of the budget trailer ordinance 2023-65S2 described the information that the committee would like to hear about today, and it sounds like committee members have additional questions, and so with that, Kimberly Freeman is here to provide her overview. Thank you.
All right, good afternoon, and again, as Mike Kruger said, I am Kimberly Freeman with the Parks Department. Today here playing Kimberly Freeman with the Parks Department. I want to welcome the 2 new council members. It's nice to have some new faces and hear new questions, and so just welcome. Thanks for a great conversation today. Hopefully I can bring it home well. So far it's been a good show. Let's see, next slide. As Tiffany laid the groundwork, what drives our capital program, our capital facility plan is the comprehensive plan. The fiscal plan went into that, and our demand and need analysis. So this is just a reminder slide. Next slide, please. One of the things that we have never talked about, and I wanted to just lay some groundwork here, is the life cycle of a project. So how long it actually takes to go from, hey, I have an idea for a park, I have an idea for something, a trail, and getting that actually built and constructed. What you don't see in this slide necessarily is purchasing the property, but that's okay. Chris just talked about that. So we'll start with, we assume we have the property. What's the first thing we do? Now, we call it planning. We also call it pre-design, feasibility, pre-engineering. Different departments call it different things. In general, we just call it planning or phase 1. This is where you really get in and you look at a baseline overview of what is and is not on this property, right? Where are there wetlands? Where are there floodplains? What are the cultural resources on the site? What are our property boundaries? This is also where we do public outreach. We talk to the public about the things that they would like to see on the property. We do look at real estate encumbrances, where are there utility easements, where are there private easements on the properties, things like that. So we know what we're working with going forward. We then develop a concept, just a general concept with a general cost estimate and a general schedule, so that then we can put that into the capital facility plan and continue to move forward. I also want you to know that it is at this stage that when we've got that concept together, then we go and apply for grant funding if the project is going to have grant funding. So this stage can actually take anywhere between 1 and 3 years, depending on grant cycles, depending on how well the public outreach went smoothly or we need to do further outreach, depending on things like cultural resources or real estate encumbrances that we need to clear off, right? The second stage or phase is design, also known as design development or engineering, and permitting. Permitting is also in this stage. So this is where we typically go out and we hire engineers and landscape architects to actually get in and do the design. There still is some public comment in this, but not as much. This really is rolling up our sleeves and working with our maintenance and operations staff regarding, you know, where do the plumbing chases need to go and where do the fences need to go and the gates and what do you need to have this secure and functional and what kind of events are you going to have on this site and how do we make sure you've got storage space, et cetera, et cetera. This phase can also, it typically takes 1 to 2 years. To be honest, contracting takes a long time in this phase, sending things out for RFQ and then interviewing the consultants and then getting it through procurement. That can take 3 to sometimes 6 months. So we can lose time in this phase. We can frankly lose time in every phase, but typically in this phase, it's the contracting is the big one that will lose time. Sometimes permitting, we can get hung up in permitting as well, which is not, I want to be really clear, I am not blaming other departments. Our engineers and contractors, they can also take a long time. We can get hung up, but those are kind of the sort of sticking points for us in this phase sometimes. Then, everybody's favorite phase, let's face it, is construction. This is everything that has to do with, of course, the contracting and the mobilization and change orders and getting everything constructed, working with staff on site, working around recreation schedules and things like that. Depending on the size of a project, again, this can be 1 to 2 years. We are just now wrapping up, what's the big one we just did, Sprinkler Outdoor. So we're finished with formal construction. We actually have a lot of pickup things, right? Now that the site is open, we're finding things aren't draining quite right over here, having to come back and make some corrections. There's still other closeout things we're doing. Which brings me to phase 4, which is closeout. There's actually a lot of things that we do at the end of a project to make sure that we have stood it up as an asset and we can maintain it correctly going forward, and we've recorded it for cost accounting and insurance purposes, and again, doing those final pickup things, closing permits and things like that. So on average, quite honestly, it seems to us on average that most projects take anywhere between 4 and 6 years. Many projects, from the time you start talking about it until the time you actually finish it, can take 9 or 10 years. Some smaller projects can be done in a year, maybe a year and a half or 2 years. So maybe as I go through the projects, I'll try to talk about that. But okay, next slide. This is our capital funds summary for 24-25. So this is just the biennium. And again, here you can see those funding sources that Tiffany talked about. So there's the impact fees, the REIT, the sales tax. There's some fund balance, and then there's grants. Again, this is our overall budgeted funds. It's right around 48 million, 48, 49 million. We do not expect to spend the entirety of that 48 or 49 million, in part because some projects get started this biennium and get carried into the next biennium. Also in part because we actually didn't get 17 million in grants. We got 14, I think 14.8, 14.5, something like that. So super proud of what we did get, because that's an amazing amount of money in grant funds, especially for a department that does not have any grant coordinators or grant people other than their planners. So anyway, all right, next slide. So now we have a whole series of slides, and they're all the same, and I'm going to go through them, and I'm going to try to be thorough but quick. So if I take too long, Councilmember Denson, just give me the hurry up about it.
And if people have questions on specific projects, why don't you just go ahead and raise your hand? Is that okay?
Okay,
We
sure,
just
sure,
deal
that
with
works.
them as we
Sure.
go.
Now, I just want to tell you a couple of things. The slides are organized according to those phases. So we start with phase 1, the planning phase, then we go to the design development, then we go to construction, and then what's in closeout. There's the project name, there's the description, there's the current status, there's next steps, the budget, and the expenditures to date, and then the CD is, of course, you guys probably already know this, but since I added these to these slides and haven't done this before, that's the council district or districts that it is in. So the pros plan, I don't think I need to talk about that since Tiffany just did. Chambers irrigation, this is really a feasibility study. We're having some issues with Chambers irrigation, both capacity and function. So we're working with both Kemper Golf as well as PPW to really figure out what are we scoping in this project, or what are we doing for 100,000. This is really looking at all of the equipment and what it's trying to serve, and figure out what are the next steps forward. So that is work just getting underway now. The next one, Councilmember Kroover, is the Frontier Multi-Use Shelters, also known as the Goat Barns. And in this biennium, what we're doing is concept and cost estimating, and we'll have that done by December 25th. And I know Project Manager Eastman's doing a great job having conversations with you and the Fair Group and 4-H. That is on track to move into design. We're hoping, regarding funding, if it's funded, we're moving to full design in 26 and 27, and then hopefully fund and construct in 28. And for those of you that don't know, the fair is located, the fair and 4-H are located out at Frontier, and so we call them multi-use shelters because during the fair they're actually used as goat barns, and then the rest of the year they're used as park shelters that are rentable by the public. The next one is the Heritage and Bethel Sports Complexes. This is cost estimating and conceptual design for sports complexes at those two facilities. That is contracted, but it's waiting staff capacity, so we're really hoping to pick that up. Actually, I had a conversation just this morning about one of the project managers picking that up. So there's a maintenance facility that we picked up when the Pasquire property that was the Conservation Futures. There actually is a maintenance facility that was sliced off of that we need to convert to a maintenance facility. So we need to do design on that. And I know staff who are out of a very small garage, not unlike Key Penn Parks, they're very excited about this new facility, so we need to get that underway. That is also awaiting capacity. There is the Meridian Habitat Park Community Center, and this is a conceptual design. That work is in contract. It's waiting for the contracts. When it says contracting, it means it's waiting for the contracts to be signed.
Okay,
Yeah.
we have a question. Councilmember Krueger, and she might have had her light on for a bit.
Thank
You're going to need to like clear your throat or something.
Yeah, I just wanted to, the Chambers Bay, it just seems that's a very high maintenance park. There's a lot of investment in Chambers.
There's a lot of investment in all of our parks.
Yeah, well, I guess because I just feel cheated out in the rural areas in a way. I mean, it's beautiful out there, and there's a lot that goes on, and I get it because it's an amazing golf course that attracts a lot of things. But the $100,000 on that, was that out of the parks dollars? I mean, because they have a ratepayer fee, don't they? Out there
Yes,
to
they
help
do.
maintain that park.
Yes, and I apologize, Councilmember Krueger, I am not remembering this off the top of my head, whether this one's coming out of Parks funds or whether it's coming out of the regional park fund, and I cannot remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's not that big a deal.
I can look it up and let you know, though.
Yeah, there's a lot of attention to Chambers, which I get. But thank you, Chair.
And the last two up there are simply the funding to be conveyed for the REIT and impact fee funding to be conveyed to both of the peninsulas. And I just put that on the planning and feasibility work because it's typically the planners that work on writing those resolutions and ILAs and conveying that money over with our financial staff.
And those are proceeding, going
Yes,
well, on
they're
track.
on my desk, yes.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Perfect.
Mine and legal's desk, yes. And we're
Right.
really hoping to get the money over to them before the end of April. And we are super delayed, and I understand that, but yes, it's on the list, high on the list, yes. Okay, so we could go to the next slide. Okay, we're still in the planning projects, but these are now the trails. There is the Foothills Trail from Wilkeson to Carbonado. So I want to be clear about this. This one's a little bit of a confusing project. It's actually from South Prairie up to Carbonado, but we can't get through South Prairie Creek Canyon because of the creek moving back and forth. So it's been a route feasibility analysis to figure out where we're going to, how and where we're routing the Foothills Trail. But then it's also working with the jurisdictions of Wilkeson and Carbonado to figure out what is the partnership on building Wilkeson to Carbonado. And one of the big questions for us is, do they want an asphalt trail or were they looking for a gravel trail? Because the master plan had called for a gravel trail. And so we're working with those jurisdictions, then we'll be seeking grant funding. And we also are part of a partnership with the National Park Service on that. So they're actually lead in that conversation. Pipeline Phase 3, this work hasn't started yet, and it's probably going to be rolled into full design, but we know we have problems going under, Tiffany, remind me, is it Fruitland? It's Woodland. It's Woodland. It's Fruitland? It's Fruitland under 512, where you have no room underneath the state viaduct for 512, and then also Crossing Canyon has a number of complexities, so we really wanted to get a consultant in to look at what were our options there before beginning full design, but because this one hasn't been assigned yet, it'll just be rolled into the full design. Trail acquisitions, we actually have made a number of trail acquisitions, a lot of trail acquisitions for the Parkland Trail, but they went into the Parkland Trail budget and not into this one. Okay, if there's no more questions, I will move to phase 2, or the projects that are currently in design. So again, these are the parks, and then we'll talk about trails. So there's the Frontier Water System. There are both quality and quantity issues out there for the Frontier Water System. We are working to construct phase 1, which is actually splitting the water system to go on the potable water, to go on Washington Water. And then the irrigation for the site will be on the well that is there. And so we're doing that shortly. And then we begin phase 2, which is design of the improvements for irrigating the site. The next one is the Gagne Playfield, and this also is separated into 2 phases because we have a number of safety issues at Gagne. So in 2025, they're actually going out and constructing a few parking improvements and putting in a gate because we currently have no way of closing that park at night, and it's creating an awful lot of problems. But the full park will be constructed in 2027. So design will continue, but they've prioritized design of the gate and the parking lot while they're moving ahead with full design of the park. Half Dollar Park, that's a tiny little park off of Pipeline Trail in South Hill, and it's actually included in the design of Pipeline, and that is contracted and underway. The Sprinker Community Center renovations, that's that. Well, we haven't really talked about that a ton. It's a $20 million renovations, huge renovations to Sprinker that actually take out the tennis center and make a gym and a track up above and a lot of community rooms and new restrooms. And I really need to get the master plan up to council for finalization, but they are working on hiring consultants to get that design underway. And then Sprinker Turf Fields, which I also know is a priority. That is in contracting, and I may have heard it was signed last week. Okay, next slide, please. And the trail projects that we have in design are the Foothills Bridge repairs, which is a number of them. Ski Park Bridge is the one that we're doing next year, and I apologize because I meant to get the date from Public Works as to when those permits will be submitted. But they're promising that they will begin that work next year. It will go into construction next year. And Pipeline Phase 2, which is from Fruitland to 94th, that will go into construction in 2027 and permits next year. So they're wrapping design this year. Next. Yes, parks construction. This is what we have currently. Now, what I used to do is I used to put anything that was still in design on the design sides and anything that was in construction on construction sides. But instead, what I did this time was anything that is going into construction or supposed to go in construction into 24, 25, I put it in construction. But some of these things are actually still finalizing designs and permits, okay? If that's too confusing, I'm open to feedback on how to do this. So we have ADA improvements, and that's in permitting right now. We have electrical improvements at Chambers in the Meadow, as well as building a shelter there, and that is currently with procurement ready to bid. There is the turn stand at the golf course, and that is currently in construction, and we're hoping to coordinate a grand opening in September of this year. We have a signage project at Chambers, and that is that Chambers is, the signage is somewhat discombobulated. So we're bringing in all new site signage so it's very clear where to go and the name of the park, et cetera, et cetera. And that will be going into construction later this year. The Frontier Arena improvements, this is the roof, the first phase of the roof of the arena, yes. That will start construction sometime after the fair this year. Want to get the fair in. And then Orange Gate Park, this is a huge project. And phase 1, which is the north part of Orange Gate, which is north of 84th, that will go into construction later this year. Now, the south part of Orange Gate has had a lot of forest restoration and new trails and trails and gates and fencing, and we're hoping to open Pipeline and the whole south southern end of Orange Gate in June. And next. Oh yeah, these are the trail projects. Of course, Chambers Trail is in construction. The bridge did not fit in as it was designed. It was not a feasible project. So we now are starting phase 3, which is figuring out the bridge and how to get across the creek down there. And then Parkland Community Trail, which is preparing to bid, and we're hoping to start construction in July or August this year, finally, because as I said, most of our purchases were actually for Parkland Trail.
And Councilmember Krueger has a question.
Yeah, thank you again, Madam Chair. I was just curious, Orange Gate Park, I always hear it all the time. It's in District 5, and I don't know where it is. I'm off the top of my head, but what are we getting for $7.7 million?
A dog park, a parking lot, a playground. I have to look at Tiffany. She did the master plan. Shelters.
How many acres is that?
Oh, a small maintenance, I guess it's just a small piece,
shop.
part of maintenance. It's very small, added to the restroom. It's just, yeah. How many acres? It's 160.
160.
160, and the part that we're formally developing is around 40. Right. And then Pipeline Trail goes right through the middle of the park.
Okay, I think was I there for the ribbon cutting? Was that Orange Gate?
I do not remember. No, we didn't have a ribbon cutting on Orange Gate. We only had a ribbon cutting on the Pipeline Trail, but you might have been there.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. All right, please proceed.
Okay, next slide. Oh, right. These are the projects that we have completed this biennium, right? So there was Cross Park Picnic Shelter and Trail, and you can see those two pictures on the bottom left. There was the Mayfair Walking Trail, and I want to say what we did was we went in and built a walking trail, planted a number of trees, both in the park as well as near the creek to help buffer and restore the creek and shade the creek. And they also put in signage and benches. The South Hill Park, I apologize for the acronyms NPDES, that's National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, and it's part of surface water management requirements, and we needed to go in and reconstruct our stormwater pond at South Hill Park that wasn't functioning correctly. So we did that. Spanaway Park entry had a number of safety issues, so we went in and made those corrections, including putting in a new sign because a car had taken out the sign there. And then the Sprinkler Team Rooms, our partners at facilities started that construction project and they finished it in 2024. I do want to just really quickly point out, and I don't know why this one's sticking in my brain, but you know, the Spanaway Park entry, that was probably done in, I don't know, 12, maybe 14 months, right? We own the property. It's easy to look at the real estate documents. It's easy to do the simple engineering and get in and do it. You don't need to do public input and get grant money and all those other things. Things like that are about a year, right? Okay, other projects that we did, if you turn the slide, please. Of course, a big one was the Tahali Mountain Bike Park. I do want to point out that even Tahali Mountain Bike Park, that was a partnership with Tahale and our first impact fee credit project, that actually started in 2017, even though it was built in 2024. So even on the private side, things take time. Next slide, please. The East Puyallup Trailhead, this one probably took 3 years. This one, for whatever reason, didn't take as long. The hold up on this one should have been done actually in 2023, but it dragged into 2024 because they found an oil tank. When they went to do construction, someone had buried an oil tank there at some point in the past. That held up construction, but we got it all cleaned up, and the new trailhead is open and widely used. Next slide, please. Of course, the Sprinkler outdoor improvements, which you guys are all familiar with. Next slide. The Foothills Trail, White River Bridge, partnership with King County, City of Buckley, and City of Enumclaw. Very exciting project that continued Foothills Trail into King County. Next project. And the Pipeline Trail, I put this one in because we're hoping to have the grand opening in June, and I felt like, well, I won't be up here again before June, so I thought I would throw it in, count it.
Wow.
And then the next slide, please. So Tiffany talked about this a little bit. We do have a world of preservation, and when we're not out in front of preservation, and it's hard to be in front of preservation given the makeup of our funding, then we tend to have a lot of emergencies. There's also things that come up with partner organizations or changing codes that require us to add things to the list. So as we go into 26, 27, we really need to be looking at staffing at staff capacity to make sure that we've got staff that can handle the emergencies so it doesn't turn everybody all at the same time. So there's a list of these, and I won't go through them, although you will notice Spiketon Bridge is the very last thing on the list, and I am happy to tell you that they will turn dirt the first week in April on that project. So a huge shout out to procurement and to the folks in permitting who have prioritized that project and moved it as quickly as possible across their desks to get it done so we could get it to construction quickly, and we're hoping to open in June. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Wonderful. This is really, really helpful. What questions do we have? Anyone? Councilmember Morell.
Here we go.
Hold on to your hat, Kimberly.
Yeah, Kimberly. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for your update. Like you say, my frustration has been on project delivery. And you said it could take up to 10 years to get some of these projects going. I'm just curious, when Parks Department land banks property, do they go through a real thorough environmental study of the property about, you had mentioned back here in some of your phases that your planning design phases. I would assume that you're not going to buy a piece of property that's on the spectrum. Or are you?
Thank you for that question, and thank you for all your questions. And quite honestly, thank you for your candor today about being frustrated and upset that it seems like things aren't. I appreciate the conversation. So let me start with the first question about Parks properties. Yes, when we buy a property, we definitely look at it in terms of our demand and need analysis that Tiffany mentioned. And then we look physically at the property. Can we get in? What are we going to do with this property? Typically, we do a phase 1 environmental analysis to make sure there's no hazardous waste or anything terrible on the property. We do not dig in detail, however, and I do think this has been one of the problems with Buckley Forest.
I haven't even got to Buckley Forest yet.
Yeah, I believe it, yeah. Anyway, so we don't dig in details. So like for Buckley Forest, we knew that there was a private road easement. We knew we had rights to open as a park. We don't know all of the details on how difficult it is to get into that property until we get in with engineering and permits and things like that. So we do a level of analysis. It's not necessarily incredibly deep. Do you want me to answer anything more on that, or do you want me to go to the larger picture?
No, I'm not going to, we can talk offline on a lot of these issues. But, Buckley Forest has been a pain in my side. I inherited it, and it still is the project that keeps on giving, not in a good way. So, I just, something's got to change to deal with projects like that. Appreciate the Tahali mountain bike trek out there. It's actually being overused. They had to shut it down for a while to reconstruct some of the trails, but it's back open again. And there again, that's an excellent public-private project, even though, and you're totally aware of some of the frustrations that went on to deliver that project to what the county assumed it would be, and the other party never thought about those assumptions, so the cost, went up on that. The other issue that I just wanted to have an explanation on is, using Tahali as an example of delivering a project in a relatively quick, from the time they turned dirt to delivered it over the county. Have you taken a deep dive into allowing developers to develop these park projects and then, give them over? Obviously not give them over, but in exchange for impact fees or other fees. It seems like, they have the potential to deliver projects a whole lot quicker than you guys do.
Yeah, interesting question, and believe it or not, I was thinking about that as I put the presentation together. And what I was thinking about was, did it take Tahali less time to build this than it would have taken us, and do we need more partnerships with developers? And that's when I realized this started in 2017. Now, part of it was all the agreements and all the legalities of doing this. And Tahali was the first out of the gate in doing the park impact fee credit. And kudos to Scott Jones and Tahali for stepping forward and doing that. I have had conversations with Scott about going to the MBA and how can we really bring to the attention of the MBA, the Master Builders Association, this opportunity for them. It's written into our codes that if they build something that's in our capital facilities plan, they can reduce their impact fee credit from something. Now, I think there's a lot more conversation to be had there, yes, and we're certainly open to that.
Okay. And then just for the public, on the foothills, the Spiketon Bridge, is contracts been lent on that one?
Is contracts been what?
Signed. I mean, do you have a contractor lined up to build
I
that?
think about this. I have to, yes. And there's permits. So the way this one works, so it's bridge, it's a little funny. Bridges can get a little different. So the contractor has to get the final permits. And there's some final engineering that has to be done with exactly what the contractor is doing. So as far as I know, the contracts have been signed, and they're currently finalizing that last of the engineering and the last of those permits. And everybody is on board to making that happen so that they're turning dirt the first week in April. Yeah.
Okay. And I assume the design of it is not wood?
I don't think it's wood. No, it's not. And I apologize, I've forgotten what it was, but no, it's not wood.
Okay, because it seems like every wooden bridge
I
on the
know.
foothills trail's got problems now. So, there again, wood is aesthetically very nice looking, but I think there again, in hindsight, I would hope we're not going to do that again. So, but like I say, I would like to follow up with you on some more of these projects and find out why they're lingering, and to see if we can help at all to kickstart some of these. I know you're going to get a new director, and in conversations with Executive Mello, that is one of the key things that his team is looking at is project delivery.
Yep.
And getting it back on track and making sure there's accountability and transparency and where the dollars are moving around. So.
Right. I just wanted to add, I'm really excited. Joe Eisenman and Bill Vetter also reached out because I guess they're doing something with projects. And yes, Executive Mello has hired Nick Anderson, who's working on, and I have to be honest, I'm excited. Let's roll up our sleeves and figure out where there is a problem, what is the problem, how we can do these things more effectively, more efficiently, where are we wasting time, where are we wasting dollars. I too am tired of being kind of on my back foot defending, no, we're fine. We're in year 5 of a 10-year plan, and Tiffany showed you the lists of projects that are either started or underway, and from an outside glance, we're on track. But I am incredibly interested in looking at the high-level data and figuring out where things are not moving as they should be. Yeah.
Okay. Then one follow-up question, Madam Chair. And this might be to Mr. Kruger and Kimberly, but when we went through and negotiated some of the park impact fees, we took away the requirement for these pocket parks. Am I remembering right how that worked?
Well, you didn't take away the requirement. What you did was you modified the requirement to exempt smaller plats from providing pocket parks. So historically, there was a requirement for any subdivision of land, that a certain amount of park be set aside within that neighborhood to serve the residents that would be moving into that neighborhood. I believe the threshold was increased to somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 lots within a subdivision, whereas if you were developing something larger than that, you would still need to provide some sort of on-site amenities in the form of a big toy or some kind of open space, sport court, but less than, I believe it's 20, you're exempt. And that was a result of the Park Impact Fee Working Group's negotiation with industry to increase the fee. And correct me, Kim, if I'm missing any of that.
No, I just think there were two things, and for whatever reason, I'm thinking it went up to 35, that you had to be 35 lots or more in order to.
Let's check.
And the other thing that was, yeah, the other thing that was done was there was a certain distance from a park that you didn't have to provide any on-site parks. Do you remember that part, Mike?
Yeah.
Like it used to be a quarter mile from a park, and now maybe it was a half mile. But there was,
that sounds about
yes.
right, but I'll pull it up and we can, before we finish up today, we can give you that.
But I would just hope that, in looking at that, walkability aspect of it, there's a lot of developments out there that have small parks, but they're parks. So hopefully, we're not getting ourselves really in a bind by saying that we're going to have to do, walkability within X amount of half a mile or whatever it is, because there's a lot of neighborhood parks out there, but they're not owned by the Parks Department. Okay, thank you.
All right, and I'm not seeing any other questions. Not seeing any other questions. Thank you so much, Ms. Freeman.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Good job. I think we're done with you.
No,
you're next.
There's no Kyle here, so
Oh.
today I'm actually going
I
to play.
had been looking. Okay. All right. Well, that was an outstanding performance, and now you have to play someone else.
Yeah.
So this is going to really challenge your character development. Kimberly Freeman playing Kyle Wintermute.
I should borrow Tom's tie and jacket and glasses or something. Yes, playing Kyle on TV here. So I'm going to keep this one a very high-level explanation because Kyle is the deputy director and he manages the operations and maintenance side of the house, and that is not my area of expertise. But he was not able to be here today, so asked me to come deliver this. So if we go to the first slide, here is the region map that Tiffany referred to, and we are divided by regions for largely for the operations side of the house, the maintenance and operations side of the house. Each region has some M&O shop. Most of them have some kind of community center or some kind of center. So all of our recreation and all of our maintenance staff are located out in the region. They're the ones that are one-on-one with the communities and really know people and know the problems and the parks. We have active parks and we have passive parks in the world of maintenance. The active parks have annual work programs. The passive parks are responsive, right? So if a tree falls or there's a homeless encampment, then they'll go out and do something, but there's not a regular annual work program that gets checked off for passive parks. So if you go to the next slide, the next riveting slide, there are 4 of these, one for each region. And I am just going to hit highlights of what went on in each of the regions and the number of work orders that are in each region. I do want to point one thing out to you. So on this slide, of course, what it talks about is these are not all the parks in the region. It's just the parks that had some kind of maintenance. And this is only 2024. This doesn't include 25. This is just 2024. And you see there what was budgeted for maintenance and what the actuals are and the percentage. So you'll notice in all of these, the percentage is around 50%. That's, of course, because we're just slightly over halfway through the biennium. But a reminder that for parks, most of our maintenance spending comes in the summertime, right? That's when we bring on more staff, the grass grows faster, there's a lot more cleanup, a lot more things going on. So you'll see that come up over the course of the next year. So in the North region, I just want to remind you that we had the Tahale opening, they have the Spiketon Bridge go, they have North Lake Taps traffic issues and parking issues, and then we have Foothills Trail ditch and ditch and culvert maintenance. There were a total of 149 what we call work orders completed. All maintenance goes into a work order. It's part of our enterprise asset management system, and so they had 149 work orders completed. Next slide, please. This is the South Region. The South Region did open a new park pavilion in Meridian Habitat Park. And the South Region also has had a number of vandalism issues at Cross Park. Really, it's kind of mind-boggling. The most frustrating to me is the EV charging stations that we cannot keep there 24 hours. It doesn't matter how many times we've put them in. Within 24 hours, they are out of there again. But the restrooms have also been vandalized, so they're just dealing with something at Cross Park. I don't know. But they did complete a total of 269 work orders in that region. The next region is the Central Region. And, of course, they opened Sprinkler Outdoors, so they're still learning all about maintaining that large new space. They had a total of 444 work orders that they completed in their region in 2024. And the next slide is the West Region. And the highlights there are Chambers Creek Park had the bark beetle. So there were all those trees removed from Chambers Creek Park, and now we're planting more trees because of the bark beetle. And then, of course, the irrigation projects. The part of the irrigation is the system keeps breaking. So there were a total of 148 work orders in that region. Next slide. This is all about deferred maintenance. So every time there is a work order put in, doesn't mean that it gets assigned, because sometimes due to staffing resources or due to funding problems, or sometimes the project is just more complicated and takes more time, or it takes engineering and permits and it needs to come up to the capital division. So this slide tells us about how many deferred projects there are and then what's been assigned to planned maintenance. And for the new council members, what planned maintenance is we actually have a team of tradespeople who, plumbers and electricians, and they're kind of the team that goes to any region and helps take care of the smaller sort of one-off construction or heavy maintenance projects that are too much for the M&O people to handle every day. And with that, I'll ask if there are any questions.
Thank you so much. Well done. Any questions about maintenance? Councilmember Morrell.
I guess this isn't necessarily about maintenance, but I appreciate your team's effort out there. Did you pick up a new mower for the Foothills Trail? A new type of mower?
Did they? I don't know. That's a very specific M&O question that I do not have the answer for. If it did, it didn't come off the capital budget, that I can tell you, yes.
Okay. The other question that I did have is the proviso language from North Taps as far as the fee schedule goes. I'm not too sure if you're evaluating that, or is that something that someone has got to come back and report on out of area fees for both parking and trailer?
Right. Let me check on that and get
Season's
back to you.
coming up.
Yep.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you so much. And I wanted to say that I took myself ice skating yesterday at Sprinker, and I only face planted once. It was really embarrassing. It was like a whole birthday party happening. But I'm okay. I was disappointed that they did not have the new ice. I don't want to say Zamboni. It came out and I was so excited. I'm like, oh, that's not the new one. But I had a great time, and I encourage everyone to go out. You don't know why the concession stand isn't open, do you? You probably don't know. That's okay.
The concession stand
At Sprinkler
Indoors?
Ice Rink. Yeah.
No, I don't.
Okay. Because I'm like, they would have done really well yesterday. There was a lot of people there. Anyway, it was a great time. So if anybody doesn't know about the fact that we have an ice rink here in Pierce County, that's a big deal.
Yes.
So thank you.
Wonderful asset.
All right. Any final comments or questions? All right. Thank you so much. Mr. Kruger, any other business?
Well, I have an answer to the question that Councilmember Morrell brought up regarding some of the trade-offs that occurred when the county increased the park impact fee significantly, and it was negotiated with industry. And so the recreational space requirement was upgraded from, or changed from a 10 dwelling unit threshold to 31 dwelling unit threshold. So under current code, until you get it beyond that 31 dwelling unit threshold, you're not required to do any sort of on-site recreational amenity. And then the language regarding proximity to schools was increased from, I believe I just read, and I've lost my place, 1/4 acre to, or I'm sorry, 1/4 mile to a half mile walking distance to a public school, other public park, et cetera, would satisfy the requirements for on-site amenities. And so again, this was something that was dealt with, it's almost 10 years ago now. It's been on the books ever since. If the council starts and wants to engage in conversations related to local parks, neighborhood parks, what should be provided, where we're seeing this uptick in density, I would think particularly where we're going to have high capacity transit, densities 40 units per acre and higher. This might be something you want to look at again in terms of obligations to provide local parks in proximity to where people are going to be needing those services.
Okay, good point. All right, thank you so much for that. Any other business?
I can provide you a potential update on your next committee meeting. We do have a piece of legislation that has been uploaded to council. It's a kind of a small kind of regulatory update of kind of non-substantive changes to our various codes. It's in our system. We're trying to, we just received it. We're trying to get it packaged so that you can hear it at the next committee meeting. I believe April 7th is your next committee meeting. Hopefully we'll get there, and then following that, we believe by the end of this week, we'll receive our first package of regulations to implement the comprehensive plan. And that's likely to be 100+ pages of regulations that will take staff, maybe a week or two to work through internally before we can get it scheduled. We're hoping for the second committee meeting in April for a first reading of that bill. If we can receive it this week and complete our review, we should be able to make that schedule, but we're not quite there yet. So that's where we're at with upcoming committee work.
All right, thank you for all your hard work. Clearly, we have some must-see PCTV coming soon, although you didn't make the April 7th meeting sound very interesting, so you need to work on that, please. Thank you to all the presenters here and to the committee, and with that, we are adjourned.